Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It's Friday, November 12th, 2021. I'm Andrew Hanson alongside Josh Crash Davis. And we've got a big surprise for everybody here on this Week 10 Main Slate podcast. We're going to try a new format, experiment a little bit. We really enjoy our Showdown Slate podcasts where we go game by game, team by team, position group by position group. So we're going to do that with the 4 key games on the slate here. Josh, you ready for this new format?
Yeah, I'm ready to try this out and see how we fare here.
Yeah, so we invite feedback. These 4 games are going to have most of our key plays on the slate. And they are the 3 games with totals over 50. There are only 3 on the slate out of the 11 games. We're going to cover all 3 of those: Atlanta, Dallas, Tampa Bay, Washington, Minnesota against the Chargers, and then a 4th game with a total of 49, Seattle and Green Bay. So let's get going here, break these down, talk about the matchups, talk about some of our favorite plays and fades in these games, and see where it takes us.
Sounds good. Let's go.
All right, Atlanta and Dallas. We're going to start with the game with the highest total on the slate, 54.5, with Dallas favored by 10 at home. It's a 1 o'clock kickoff. We've got Atlanta 4-4, Dallas 6-2. And I'll start with this Atlanta side here. We've attacked Dallas with passing games all season long. They're number 25 in passing yards allowed, 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Matt Ryan is a value option right off the bat here, 6,000 on DraftKings. Pretty good price for him coming off a solid game against New Orleans, 343-2. The question is, if you go with the value play here in a potentially high-scoring game, is who do you pair him up with? Because the Atlanta receiving core is in a bit of a disarray with Ridley out. So you look at their quote-unquote, big pass receivers here. We got Russell Gage and Zaccheaus. Now, Gage last week, 7 for 64. He's been running a little bit more in the slot. Zaccheaus a little bit more out wide. And Zaccheaus ended up with a nice fantasy point day because he had 2 touchdowns, but he only caught 3 passes. Gage, 7 for 64. He's more of a mid-tier value option. 5,000 on DraftKings. So he's definitely playable. But there's Cordell Patterson here too. And he was really the guy who led them. 6 catches for 126.
Yeah.
6,600 on DraftKings. So what are your thoughts there? If you go with Ryan, we generally want to pair our quarterback up with one pass catcher if we feel strongly about who that go-to guy is going to be. Anybody jump out of that group for you?
Yeah, I definitely like Cordell Patterson. It's funny that they list him as a running back. He's really not playing that role as much as he is a receiver. I think he only had like 9 carries last week. So his primary role has been a receiver. Like you said, 6 receptions for 126 yards. And this game script is just going to be up and down the field, shootout type game, in my opinion. So I definitely want to play Cordell Patterson. And, maybe look at some value with Gage or Zaccheaus, but Cordell Patterson would definitely be my first, play out of the receiving core.
Yeah, I can't blame you. I do like him more on DraftKings at 66 than FanDuel at 78.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see how it all comes together. We also have Kyle Pitts, who has had some big games on the pricier end of the spectrum for tight ends this week. So he's not my first target, but Matt Ryan's in consideration for me. There's a couple others we'll get to here later on in the show. But why don't we look at this Dallas side, because they are the 10-point favorites.
Yeah, for Dallas, it's so hard to understand what happened last week against Denver. Teddy Bridgewater was just lighting them up. The running game was running all over them. It was just like everything Denver did was working, And so it was just really surprising. But I think this is a really good bounce back spot for Dallas. Dak Prescott, 6,900. CeeDee Lamb, 7,000. Amari Cooper, 6,200. I'm probably going to get at least 2 of those guys. I'm not as high on Zeke Elliott this week. I think there's better options in the running back position. And then you've got the free square, basically, in Michael Gallup. He's 4,000. He missed all of this year basically since week 1, but he should be back this week. He saw 7 targets in week 1 against Tampa, working behind, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper as a wide receiver 3. I just feel like it's too cheap, too good of a matchup. So Gallup's going to be that third option for Dallas, which leaves me to believe that maybe we don't want to look at Dalton Schultz. We've looked at him quite a bit this year. He's 5,000. There's tight ends that I feel are in a better spot. Dallas is getting healthier in the receiving core, so I think Schultz is going to drop off a little bit. So that's kind of what I'm looking at on the Dallas side. How do you feel about it?
For the most part, I look at it the same way, and I'll follow up on that same point. I do think Gallup can threaten Schultz a little bit from that big volume he's been seeing. For Gallup himself, though, I like the price at 4,000. He could smash there, but you never know with the calf injury for a wide receiver who's been out for a while. So I think we need to just be a little bit cautious there. I do prefer the Dak to Lamb combo here. Strong matchup, by the numbers. I'm also with you on Zeke here because because of the knee issue, he's a little bit banged up, a little bit limited, which is unfortunate because this is an awesome matchup on the ground. In fact, this week at PFF, this is the best matchup for offensive line versus defensive line, the run game. It's a 75% advantage. We've got another strong one here later in the show we'll get to. They do have left tackle Tyron Smith out. But because Dallas has been splitting carries quite a bit, giving more and more to Pollard, not an even split, because Pollard is a presence this year, and because Zeke's a little bit limited physically, I probably will steer clear of that backfield. So I probably will stick with that Dallas passing game primarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's going to be the way to go on the Dallas side. And there's one other thing I was wanting to point out. I'm trying to remember. Oh, Amari Cooper. He is dealing with a hamstring, so he was limited participant today in practice. Those are the kind of injuries that always tend to linger, so that's a concern that he could re-injure that hamstring. And then if that happens, then Gallup would absolutely be a top option at a wide receiver 2 spot. So,
yeah, well, with both of them having the injury issues, it just elevates Lamb for me even more in the cash games.
Yeah, and then
Cooper and Gallup more GPP options.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go to game 2, also at 1:00. Tampa and the Washington football team. Total of 51 here. It's another 10-point spread, this time with the road team Tampa as the big favorite. Both of these teams, Josh, coming in with some good rest after a bye week. So they're on equal footing there. And, Tom Brady is the guy we've got to start to look at here on the Tampa side, because this passing game, that's the way to attack Washington this year. They're number 32 in passing yards allowed, number 1 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So Tom Brady, who's really had a tremendous season, is in a great spot again. 7,600 on DraftKings, worth considering. Now, he's not going to have his normal weapons out there. Gronk is out. Antonio Brown is still out. And Godwin is questionable with a foot issue.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be tracking that injury news for sure. Godwin has a 98.3 matchup advantage on Pro Football Focus, which is tremendous. So I'd like to get that injury news and figure out what the situation is and play him. Because we have seen him really step up with Gronk and AB out. You've also got Evans as an option. And then the third guy, Tyler Johnson, is a value option here. 3,300 on DraftKings. Last week against New Orleans, he caught 5 for 65. I like that option, especially as a potential pivot to Gallup. You save 700 if you want to go there. So I'm looking at, making a lineup or two with Brady paired up with 1 or 2 of those receivers.
Yeah, for sure. And also you've got Scotty Miller coming back from injured reserve. So that's another option on the value side. He's only 3,000. So he's down near the bottom for value wide receivers for sure.
Right. And then that could likely eliminate the action for Cyril Grayson, who caught a 50-yard touchdown last week, but only played 8 snaps.
Right.
So I don't think we need to go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. How about the Washington football team side?
Before I get to Washington, I do want to point out, because I don't think very many people are going to realize this, but even at 44 years old, Tom Brady is the #1 quarterback in fantasy right now.
In terms of fantasy points for the season?
Yep.
Yep.
In terms of fantasy points for the season.
Just getting it done. Big yardage, big touchdowns.
Yep. So on the Washington side, there's not a whole lot I like here. I do like Terry McLaurin. I feel like he's pretty matchup proof, and Tampa's been susceptible to the pass. And then obviously you could look to pair him up with Tyler Heineke at 5,400. You do have DeAndre Carter as a value play. He's 3,000. He led Washington in receivers in targets last week. On 6 targets, he had 3 catches for 51 yards. So that's a nice value play that you could look at. And outside of that, there's not really that much I'm seeing on the Washington side that I like. Tampa's really tough against the run, so I don't want to look at Antonio Gibson or J.D. McKissick or any of those guys. And really, that's just the only thing I'm looking at is Heineke, McLaurin, and maybe a value play with DeAndre Carter.
Yeah, this passing game is certainly an option because of the susceptibility for Tampa, as you mentioned. Heineke, talk about a GPP play at 5,400. They just haven't had a lot of big games through the air. So the ceiling is what you're concerned with there. And the other thing with Washington is that it's like every week they have a different group of receivers out there.
Right. Yeah.
Guys coming in and out. Curtis Samuel, who's doubtful. De'Ami Brown is questionable. So if Brown comes back, then that throws a wrench into the plans potentially for Carter. He gets a little bit of a knockdown for me. McLaurin, yes, he's certainly an option. More expensive than Godwin and Lamb, so I don't like him as much. And I don't want the running backs here in terms of their ability to rush, but McKissick is in play for me just as the guy who's going to get all those catches for the running backs. Another big game last game for him, 8 for 83. Gaskin had a really big game against Tampa catching the ball, 10 catches for 74 and 2 touchdowns. There's been a couple others as well. So 5,200 on DraftKings, I think he's in play. Especially if you're going to go with Brady and one of his pass catchers, you probably want to have one guy on the other side to run it back with.
Yeah.
So I McKissick is in consideration for me there. And then you could look at the tight end too, Ricky Seals-Jones, 3,700. Tampa Bay's given up the 9th most fantasy points to that position. So
how much is McKissick?
These 30s, McKissick is 52 on DraftKings.
Okay.
54 on FanDuel. It's just, you just don't feel very comfortable with these Washington guys.
Yeah.
But with that kind of a total, if Tampa is out to a solid lead, then somebody's going to be catching those passes as they try to keep it close.
Yeah, and I definitely think that'll happen. You just have that feeling that this is going to be one of those Tom Brady revenge games where he just goes out and throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns and just, sits on the bench in the fourth quarter.
We shall see. Well, we hope that it's a big day for us on Sunday at DFS Coach Talk. So jump in with us if you'd like our lineups, dfscoachtalk.com. Pick up whichever length of membership you'd want, and you'll have access to all of our sports the whole time you're there. And for the main slate, we give out the coach's clipboard with some highlighted core plays and then a bunch of options to fill out your lineup. And then we give out full lineups on FanDuel and Yahoo, cash lineups, GPP lineups. So join us this Sunday for the hopefully big winning day. All right. Game 3 on the podcast today. We have Minnesota and the Chargers, 4:05 Eastern kickoff. This total is 53, so it's the second highest total on the board. Chargers favored by 3 at home. Let me start with this Minnesota side. Tough overtime loss to Baltimore last week. But, an opportunity here to put up some points.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at the Chargers here throughout the season, the way to attack them has been on the ground. They're pretty stingy to quarterbacks and wide receivers. But for these running backs, they're number 32 in yards allowed. They've given up their top 5 in fantasy points allowed. So I'm looking at Dalvin Cook here, 8,000 on DraftKings. Went over 100 yards last week. The Chargers have given up 11 rushing touchdowns to running backs. We know he's involved in some controversy off the field.
Mm-hmm.
But this is an opportunity for him to get out there. He's come out strong and said the truth will come out. Maybe he really gets focused here and gets after it. And that's the main place I want to look here on this Minnesota side.
Mm-hmm.
Conklin is another option at 3,400 because the Chargers have given up the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends.
Right.
So I'm just looking at Cook or Conklin here to get some exposure to this game on the Minnesota side.
Yeah, I actually had the exact same thing. I have Dalvin Cook and Tyler Conklin written down here, so hopefully we're tracking there.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely second. I have written down here that they're second against wide receivers, LA. So the running game and the tight end would make a lot of sense to attack.
Exactly. All right. How about that Chargers side?
Well, first of all, I'm going to look at Justin Herbert, 7,300. After he had 2 kind of poor performances against Baltimore and New England, he bounced back last week against Philly with his best game of the year, 32 for 38 for 356 and 3 touchdowns, 2 passing, 1 rushing, going up against the Vikings defense last week that last week against Baltimore really struggled. Lamar Jackson had 386 total yards, threw for 266 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, ran for 120 yards. Now, one thing we do have to monitor with the Chargers is Keenan Allen is dealing with a little bit of a knee injury, and recently he's been Justin Herbert's favorite target. So if he's out, then that'll probably change how I want to pair up him and Keenan Allen. But right now I'm looking at Herbert and Allen for sure. And I think this is a really good bounce back week for Austin Eckler. The Vikings are 23rd against running backs. They let down a lot of people last week, so I kind of feel like we should go right back to him this week. If you're looking for some value, if Keenan Allen is out, we could look at Jalen Guyton at 3,600. I think that would be a possible value play. And that's about it for me on the Charger side.
Yeah, I like that breakdown. I'm with you there. Keenan Allen is a big X factor here for me on this slate because I love him when he's in a groove, and he absolutely smashed last week. Good matchup on paper. But you've got Mike Williams here, and looking at the guys who've had big games against Minnesota through the air, they're more of the outside receiver type.
Yeah.
DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, Hollywood Brown. These guys will come into the slot a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, it's a pretty even split to me on which guy, if you're going to pick one, is going to have the big game. And I just don't like trusting Mike Williams because he can be so big play dependent, touchdown dependent. So that's my hesitation here is I'd like to get some exposure to the wide receiver core there. And typically I do lean to Keenan Allen, especially on DraftKings.
Mm-hmm.
But just a little hesitant this week. So
yeah, I definitely feel that. And I think that if Allen is out, then obviously Mike Williams becomes his top option. And then he's going to be more of a must play if you're going to play Justin Herbert. So
right. And then Eckler, like you said, good matchup for him as well. This is actually the number 2 best run blocking advantage, according to PFF this week, 74%. Now, a lot of the running backs against Minnesota, a little bit more of the bell cow with the huge carry numbers. We know Eckler's more involved in the passing game.
Right.
But definitely a decent possibility as well.
Yep, I agree.
All right, one game to go. It is Seattle and Green Bay. Josh won't be watching this one. He never watches the Packers. Actually, lots of folks will be watching this one because it could be a tremendous matchup of quarterbacks coming back into the mix here with Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. And Vegas is looking at this as a total of 49 with your Packers favored by 3.5. I'll start with Seattle, who's rested. They had a bye last week, and it has allowed Russell Wilson to get out there. It's a Friday night right now as we're recording this. He's already been named as the starter. So Seattle trying to stay in the chase there at 3-5. Big game for them. It feels like it's been a while since we've seen him because he had that incredible durability streak, making all those starts. But if you will recall, he did have a very strong start to the season, 10 passing touchdowns, only 1 interception. So he's got that confidence coming in. My main target here with Seattle is probably not Wilson himself, but possibly DK Metcalf. He's got an excellent matchup this week on paper. 86.9 is the matchup advantage at PFF. I think he'll see mostly Kevin King, who came back last week, right, Josh?
Yeah.
And DK runs 53% of his routes to the left. So DK would be my main target here. Not too interested in these running backs. Carson is still out, but Collins, he's not a huge volume guy. And there are some other guys who are getting some touches. Homer, 4 carries and a catch last week. So it's probably DK or pass for me on the Seattle side.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not really sure because last week Eric Stokes didn't play. He injured himself in the warm-up, so he didn't play. And so King was on the left side and Shannon Sullivan was on the right side. And so I'm not really sure exactly where they're going to line up Kevin King. They've even talked about moving him to the slot some, but I know that Metcalf will line up in the slot too. So he'll definitely have some routes against Metcalf. But Eric Stokes is questionable, so we could see him out against Metcalf. I'm not sure yet. So
okay.
Yeah.
Before you get to Green Bay, I will also mention that Dwayne Eskridge is active, so that could complicate things for that third receiver with Swain, but not a place we typically go on the full slate. Of course, these breakdowns will be applicable if you want to do any individual game showdowns this week, other than the big primetime games that we'll cover in our podcast later this weekend. But talk to me about this Green Bay side.
Well, first of all, I want to start with the injuries. David Bakhtiari is doubtful. I don't think he's going to play this week. He did just get activated off of IR. But Kenny Clark and Kingsley Keke are both Keke is actually doubtful, and Kenny Clark is questionable. And they're the 2 interior linemen for Green Bay. And so with Chris Carson being out, it's not as big of a deal, I don't think, as it would have been. But that could have potentially been a disaster. So I just wanted to start right there. So for me, my top play for Green Bay is actually Aaron Jones. 6,900, Seattle's ranked. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. Aaron Rodgers has missed the last 2 weeks. So I'm not really sure exactly what it's going to look like. Devontae Adams is the most expensive wide receiver on the slate, but I don't think this is going to be the best week to play him. It's going to be 3 weeks that he hasn't practiced with Rodgers now. When you go back to Arizona, he missed that game. You go Kansas City last week, and now this week, Aaron Rodgers has missed another week of practice. So that's 3 weeks without Rodgers and Adams practicing together. You've got Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He's 3,500, but once again, chemistry could be an issue. They haven't played together since week 4. So really, believe it or not, I'm just looking at Aaron Jones in this game.
Yeah, he's my favorite play as well. If you're looking at the history here with Seattle this season, they've given up a ton of production to running backs, both on the ground and catching the ball. And we know that Jones is terrific at both. But what about A.J. Dillon here? Just his presence.
Mhm.
I watched a lot of that game last week, and I was really surprised to look at the box score and see that he had 8 carries and Jones had 12, because it felt like every time I turned around, they were handing it off to Dillon,
Yeah.
trying to keep the ball out of Casey's hands. And he
Mhm.
looked good. He seems to have gotten more and more of a role in the offense. He looks terrific, very strong runner. Do you think Green Bay is playing a little bit of the long game here, long view, try to keep them both healthy for this extended season? Or, do you think that the numbers last week were a product of it being a low scoring battle where they didn't get a ton of plays
Mhm.
to go around?
Yeah, I think there's two things there that we can consider. The first thing is the week before against Arizona, without their top 3 wide receivers, they relied on Dillon and Jones pretty heavily. So their workload was pretty heavy. At the same time, they were coming off a 10-day rest because that was a Thursday game, so they had off 10 days until that Sunday game. And so to me, it would have made more sense with a guy like Love making his first career start to rely more on Jones and Dillon. So I was pretty surprised that they didn't do that. And Matt LaFleur talked about in the post game how he, kind of regrets that they didn't run them more. So that's something that could lead to Jones and Dillon getting more opportunities. But for me, what distinguishes them on DraftKings anyway is the receptions that Jones gets. Dillon doesn't usually get as many receptions as Jones, and that's kind of the differentiator for me. And Jones tends to find the end zone more often. So
Excellent. Yep. Good stuff. All right. Well, hopefully that helped everybody get ready for the main slate as we look at the 4 key games. The Vegas total is very important. We want to get in shootouts. We want to get more opportunities for touchdowns.
yeah,
We don't want to see what happened with our Baltimore Ravens last night, scoring 10 points
right.
in a real frustrating situation. Shout out to Omaha Joe, who had our best FanDuel lineup last night in the Thursday game. He had Mark Andrews in his lineup. We also cashed well on DraftKings, despite it not being a ceiling game for the Baltimore guys, because it wasn't a ceiling game for the Miami guys either. And we were heavily invested in that Baltimore passing attack. But what we do here is we really try to break down each of these games. And we wanted to give everybody a glimpse of that here on this podcast. So please give us some feedback on YouTube if you like this format. If you prefer the position by position breakdown, we're open to that and appreciate all your support. Do feel free to hit that thumbs up as well. And check out our primetime podcast that will be airing later this weekend for the Sunday night and Monday night games. Did I cover everything, Josh?
Yeah, I think so. I was going to go back real quick to that Miami-Baltimore game. The Dolphins' defense was the top scorer.
Yeah, how about that?
What kind of a night that was.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, well, that was a lot of fun here. Looking forward to this Week 10 main slate. So on behalf of Josh Crash Davis and the rest of the DFS Coach Talk team, I'm Andrew Hanson saying goodbye. We'll see you next time as we look to crush it in DFS.